are you? Who sent you?
I'm scared, son.
You want to kill your own son?
I want you out of here.
I'm scared, Dad.
Not only can you see the future,
I can change it.
As the cold and darkness of winter descended in 1983, a film would emerge that transformed this ancient notion of a cursed wanderer into something new. A man cursed not by the loss of his head, but by the terrible gift of seeing the past, present, and future. Johnny Smith, played by Christopher Walken, is a school teacher who discovers he has acquired psychic abilities after emerging from a 5-year coma. When he experiences visions, he encounters a mysterious blank space dubbed the Dead Zone, which represents future events that remain uncertain. This void in his visions suggests that fate isn't fixed and that Johnny has the power to alter the course of destiny.
You have the power of second sight.
The Dead Zone, where director David Cronenberg and author Stephen King asked the question, if you could see the future and had the power to change it, would you? In 1979, King, already redefining the landscape of American horror literature with works like Carrie, Salem's Lot, and The Shining, turned his attention to a different kind of terror, one born not from supernatural evil, but from the burden of knowledge itself. The shadow of Watergate lingered, and political cynicism was at its height. King, always attuned to the anxieties of his time, began to wonder, what if someone could see the future? And more importantly, what would be their moral obligation to act on that knowledge? The novel took shape around Johnny Smith, a name chosen for its deliberate ordinariness. I wanted him to be the average American man, King would later write, thrust into circumstances that were both extraordinary and terrible. In the late 1970s and early 80s, Hollywood developed a taste for stories about psychic powers and visions of the future. Brian De Palma's Carrie had already shown how telekinesis could be used to explore isolation and repression, while his film The Fury pushed the concept into full-blown espionage paranoia. Films like Eyes of Laura Mars turned psychic sight into a tool for high-fashion murder mystery. Even Dario Argento's Phenomena, or Creepers, depending on where you watched it, gave its heroines psychic powers that blurred the line between horror and fantasy. Most of these films treated psychic ability as spectacle, a showcase for visual effects, set pieces, and heightened drama. The Dead Zone did something else. It stripped away the glamour and turned second sight into an unrelenting moral burden. Johnny Smith's visions aren't gifts, they're intrusions. They force him to confront tragedies before they happen, but offer no guarantee he can change them. Can I ask if you're enjoying this video to hit like and subscribe? I do really appreciate the support. At the time, Dino De Laurentis was one of Hollywood's most powerful independent producers. The Italian-born mogul had already transformed European cinema with productions like La Strada and Nights of Cabiria. His transition from European cinema to American productions began in earnest with 1973's Serpico, starring Al Pacino, a critical and commercial success that proved De Laurentis could navigate the American market. By 1983, De Laurentis had begun to focus on literary adaptations, particularly in the horror and science fiction genres. He had already secured the rights to several Stephen King properties, including Firestarter and Night Shift. But The Dead Zone represented something different, a chance to merge King's commercial appeal with more sophisticated cinematic ambitions. De Laurentis' vision for the film was clear. This would be no ordinary horror movie. He sought a director who could balance supernatural elements with psychological depth. His choice would prove smart. David Cronenberg, known at the time as the master of body horror, would bring a depth to the material that transformed it into something entirely unique. When David Cronenberg came on board to direct The Dead Zone, the choice raised eyebrows in Hollywood. Cronenberg seemed an unlikely candidate for Stephen King's psychological thriller. Yet his journey to The Dead Zone reveals why he was perfectly suited to explore the terror of unwanted transformation.
We have to give people something they can't get anywhere else. And we do that.
Cronenberg's earliest works, the experimental films Stereo and Crimes of the Future, already showed his fascination with the relationship between mind and body. Shot in a clinical documentary style, these films explored themes of medical experimentation and psychological transformation, themes that would later echo in Johnny Smith's story. His first commercial feature, 1975's Shivers, established what would become known as body horror. The film's exploration of parasites that transform their human hosts into sex-crazed zombies was controversial, but it demonstrated Cronenberg's ability to merge psychological and physical horror. 1977's Rabid, starring adult film actress Marilyn Chambers, continued these themes. His next movie, The Brood, marked a significant evolution in Cronenberg's work. The film explored psychological trauma, manifesting in physical form. 1981's Scanners proved particularly relevant to his later work on The Dead Zone. Its story of individuals with devastating psychic abilities demonstrated Cronenberg's interest in exploring psychological powers and their cost. Just before The Dead Zone, Cronenberg released what many consider his first masterpiece, 1983's Videodrome. Starring James Woods and Debbie Harry from Blondie, this hallucinatory exploration of media, reality, and transformation. This was the first time Cronenberg's horror came almost entirely from the mind, not the body. In this way, The Dead Zone became a bridge in Cronenberg's career, connecting the raw transgression of his early work with the drama of The Fly and A History of Violence.
What was interesting to me about the Dead Zone were the differences between our work rather than the similarities, and I was very much attracted to the characters of the Dead Zone, which were a very open, simple, accessible, honest, almost naive, small-town characters, very different from the characters that I normally deal with in my own scripts.
Director of photography Mark Irwin's collaboration with Cronenberg had begun with 1979's Fast Company and continued through Scanners and Videodrome. Their partnership had developed a visual grammar that balanced a clinical look with an emotional connection. But The Dead Zone would require something different, a more naturalistic approach that could still capture supernatural elements. When it came to The Dead Zone, we took an austere approach, Irwin said. Out of all of the films he made with Cronenberg, The Dead Zone is the only one where he had a mission statement when he was scouting in places like Niagara-on-the-Lake and Vermont, and Cronenberg told him to make it look like Norman Rockwell shot it. He realized then that this was a film about things that go bump in the day. Irwin stated that when Johnny touches or takes the hand of another character, he sees into the secret parts of their lives. Christopher was adamant about reacting to these touches with a strong jolt, and it needed to be an external stimulus. Director and DOP ended up using a handgun loaded with blanks. Everyone wore headphones and goggles. They'd shoot the gun off right next to the camera, and Walken would react. The Dead Zone was also one of the few times Irwin convinced Cronenberg to indulge in creating a classic jump scare, in the scene where Smith suddenly encounters Sheriff Bannerman, Tom Skerritt, in a hallway, while searching the home of Bannerman's deputy. I noticed the mood of the scene, and Irwin said to David, "This is where someone jumps into the foreground. Sometimes the audience needs a jolt, but you can only do it if you set the proper mood." Screenwriter Jeffrey Boehm initially began developing the adaptation with Lorimar Film Entertainment. Producer Carol Baum gave the book to Boehm and asked him to write a screenplay. "I saw it had great possibilities and agreed to do it," Boehm said. He developed a script with director Stanley Donen, the same man who directed Gene Kelly in Singing in the Rain. But Donen left the project before the film had reached production at Lorimar. Lorimar eventually closed its film division after a series of box office failures, and soon after, producer Dino De Laurentis bought the rights to The Dead Zone. Before Jeffrey Boehm would craft the final screenplay that would ultimately light up cinema screens, The Dead Zone went through several iterations. Initially, Stephen King himself attempted to adapt his novel, but it was Boehm, relatively unknown at the time, who would find the key to cracking the narrative structure. King's novel, with its episodic structure and internal monologues, seemed resistant to conventional adaptation. "The book is really several stories in one," Boehm would later explain. The trick was finding the thread that would bind them all together into a cohesive film narrative. In the novel, we don't learn about Stilson's significance until quite late, Boehm noted. I realized we needed to plant those seeds earlier, to give the audience a sense of where all this was heading. One of Boehm's most significant changes was the streamlining of Johnny Smith's visions. While the novel featured numerous small predictions, Boehm focused on 3 major storylines: the Castle Rock killer, the Stewart family tragedy, and the Stilson prophecy. This gave the film a clearer narrative progression while maintaining the theme of escalating personal cost. Some beloved elements from the novel had to be sacrificed. Johnny's relationship with his mother was significantly reduced, as was much of the political background of the Stilson storyline. The screenplay went through numerous revisions during pre-production. Croninberg worked closely with Boehm to refine dialogue and tone, while Christopher Walken's casting led to further adjustments to accommodate his unique cadence and presence. Once we knew it was Chris, I went back and rewrote Johnny's dialogue to match his rhythms, Boehm revealed.
Don't you know who I am?
Of course I know who you are. You think I'd have you come into my son's life without checking you out? But I hired you for your abilities as a teacher, not as a fortune teller. Now, don't give me any argument. The ice is gonna break!
Boehm's dialogue often stripped away King's more florid prose in favor of stark simplicity. Johnny's famous line about the ice breaking,
The ice is gonna break!
carries more weight precisely because of its simplicity. The screenplay structure was carefully crafted to build tension gradually. Each of Johnny's visions becomes progressively more significant and more personally costly. We needed the audience to feel the weight of these predictions, Boehm explained. Each one takes something from Johnny, leading to his ultimate sacrifice. If Johnny's early visions were about personal loss, his final one was about something far larger, the collapse of the future itself. Greg Stillson isn't a shadowy villain. He's a showman, a handshaker, a man who can work a crowd into a frenzy with folksy charm, blunt promises, and the confidence of someone who's never doubted himself. Stilson's rallies feel less like political events and more like performances. He thrives on spectacle, thrives on being underestimated, and sells himself as the only one bold enough to tell it like it is. To his supporters, he's authentic. To his critics, he's reckless and dangerous. The most chilling thing about Stilson is how plausible he feels. The baby as shield moment, a split-second act of pure self-preservation, strips away the mask entirely. It's the instant Johnny knows this is a man who will burn the world rather than lose. King wrote Stilson in the shadow of 70s political cynicism, but time has made the character feel almost predictive. The bluster, the bravado, the magnetic hold on his base, they're all qualities we've seen on the real-world stage in more recent years. Watching him now, it's hard not to feel that the dead zone was warning us long before we knew what to look for. The ending underwent several revisions. Boehm and Croninberg opted for something more intimate and psychological. The real confrontation isn't between Johnny and Stilson, Boehm noted. It's between Johnny and fate itself. The final shooting script was lean, with very little that wouldn't make it to the screen. Boehm's style matched Cronenberg's visual approach perfectly.
My concept of how this man's visions, the character played by Christopher Walken, how his visions should be conveyed on the screen was that they should be also totally real, physically real, and that in fact they were so real that in some of his visions he would actually physically be within his own visions. He would be present in his visions. And to me that's how was the most powerful cinematic way to portray the impact of these visions on him.
The stellar cast included Christopher Walken, who by 1983 had already won an Academy Award for The Deer Hunter, but his portrayal of Johnny Smith would prove to be one of his most nuanced performances. The emotions Walken conveys throughout are heartbreaking, from waking up from his years-long coma to see his whole life has changed.
You know what God did for me? He threw an 18-wheel truck at me, bounced me into nowhere for 5 years.
Stephen King had originally wanted actor Bill Murray or the role of Johnny Smith before Walken was cast. Brooke Adams, known for her work in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, brought the pain of lost love to Johnny's former fiancée, Sarah, who married another man during his coma.
Why did it have to happen like this?
Veteran character actor Herbert Lom, famous for his role as Chief Inspector Dreyfus in the Pink Panther series, delivers a compassionate performance as Dr. Sam Wysack, the neurologist who helps Johnny understand his newfound abilities. Martin Sheen, fresh off his success in Apocalypse Now, portrays Greg Stillson, the unhinged politician whose dark destiny becomes central to the plot.
You're not the voice of the people, I am the voice of the people.
Tom Skerritt, recognized for his roles in Alien and MASH, plays the pragmatic sheriff George Bannerman, who sets aside his skepticism to seek Johnny's help in solving a crime.
Now, I'm at my wit's end. I've exhausted about every conventional method of approach to this situation. I've come up with nothing.
Canadian actor Nicholas Campbell, who Croninberg wanted in the role of Johnny Smith, brought a disturbing intensity to Deputy Frank D., a character whose true nature becomes a pivotal part of the story. And the acclaimed Anthony Zerbe, known for his villainous roles in films like License to Kill and The Omega Man, appeared as Roger Stewart, a wealthy businessman who seeks Johnny's help with his son. Though Stephen King's novel was set in the fictional town of Castle Rock, Maine, The Dead Zone was primarily filmed in southern Ontario, Canada. This decision, driven partly by economic considerations, would prove creatively fortuitous, as the Canadian winter provided the perfect backdrop for Johnny Smith's isolated world. The picturesque town of Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ontario, served as the primary location for Castle Rock's exterior scenes. Its well-preserved 19th century architecture and small-town atmosphere provided exactly the kind of New England aesthetic Croninberg was seeking. The Screaming Tunnel, located in Niagara Falls, Ontario, provided the backdrop for one of the film's most crucial sequences, where Johnny helps Sheriff Bannerman track the Castle Rock killer. This limestone tunnel, built in the 1800s, added an authentic sense of history and menace to these pivotal scenes. Composer Michael Kamen, whose work has included Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and the Lethal Weapon movie series, wrote an emotionally deep and charged score for the film, which perfectly connects to the characters and the situations through the story. The Dead Zone's opening credits masterfully set the film's ominous tone through fragmented black forms that materialize over tranquil suburban landscapes. The shards emerge gradually, creating an unsettling visual puzzle that mirrors the film's themes of fractured reality. This distinctive style was a hallmark of title designer Richard Greenberg's work throughout the 1980s, where he frequently employed typography as both an architectural element and a visual barrier, establishing a powerful visual metaphors that echo the film's central themes. Upon its release in October 1983, The Dead Zone received praise for its restraint and psychological depth. Critics noted how Cronenberg had managed to marry King's populist storytelling with his own artistic sensibilities. The result was a film that worked both as a thriller and as a meditation on power and sacrifice. 2 decades after its release, The Dead Zone returned in a different form, a USA Network series starring Anthony Michael Hall. Running for 6 seasons, it traded the film's quiet fatalism for a more episodic structure, exploring Johnny's visions week by week. While the tone was lighter, the moral dilemmas remained. Beyond television, its influence lingers in stories about the burden of second sight in films like Minority Report and The Conjuring.
Picking up anything in here, hon?
Over time, the film has grown in stature, now often cited alongside Misery and Stand By Me as one of the best King adaptations ever put to screen. In the end, The Dead Zone is more than a thriller about a man who can see the future. It's a story about the choices we make when confronted with undeniable evil. In Castle Rock's eternal winter, Johnny Smith found his purpose. In his tragedy, we find a strange kind of hope that even in our darkest moments, we retain the power to change the future, whatever the cost.
Goodbye.